verification laws and propositions forcing platforms to restrict content accessed by children and teens have been multiplying in recent years. The problem is, implementing such measures necessarily requires identifying each user accessing this content, one way or another. This is bad news for your privacy. For a few years now, several legislators in North America, Europe, and Australia have expressed concern about children and teens accessing certain types of content online. While there is no doubt some online content can be worrisome, implementing a technological solution for this is extremely problematic. By mandating platforms to be legally responsible to verify a user's age, regulators effectively force them to identify each user requesting access to content deemed inappropriate under a certain age threshold. If these regulations continue to proliferate, this could lead to the end of pseudonymity online. How can age be verified online? Verifying age online is difficult. There isn't any magical solution to it. It's either recording how a user looks or scanning official documents. Conducting verification on device offers only a few additional protections, considering this information still has to be checked and reported with an external service somehow. Moreover, processes used to keep this data on device are often opaque. Taking into account how valuable this information is, it becomes very difficult to trust any for-profit third-party services with such a sensitive task. Users' faces and official documents are two types of very sensitive information. Who becomes responsible to collect, process, store, and safeguard this data? With whom does this data get shared? And for which other purposes? And how accurate is this data anyway? Some platforms and third-party providers of the rapidly growing identity verification industry have started to use facial recognition and face scan systems in order to determine a user's age. The problem is, these systems are horrible for everyone's privacy, extremely problematic to use due to racist and gendered biases, inaccurate to determine the correct age, and on top of that, can be cheated. The second solution is to require users to provide an official piece of ID. Considering an official ID often contains a photo, full legal name, date of birth, home address, and government-specific codes, this is even worse. All this sensitive data then gets collected by either the platform itself or a third-party provider, with little oversight or incentive to protect this data at all. Leaks and breaches for this enormous data trove are just around the corner. Unfortunately, this isn't speculative. Data leaks have already occurred. The more copies of your official documents exist online, the greater the risk this data will get exposed, and the less value this document has to actually identify you when it's truly needed. And again, this sort of verification is easy to cheat. Any determined teenager will soon learn how to either create a fake ID, use someone else's ID, or go around this verification system in another way. Age verification laws will without a doubt support a flourishing criminal industry to provide fake or stolen IDs, even more easily online, where age verification is or will be required. In April this year, Discord started to test age verification systems using facial or ID scans as a way to comply with Australia's and UK's new laws. In July of 2025, the Online Safety Act came into effect in the United Kingdom. This law requires social media companies and online platforms to check that the users accessing their website or restricted content are over 18 years old. Since the introduction of the law, several websites have complied, such as YouTube, Spotify, and Reddit. The law has been wide-reaching and has already affected many platforms. Because of the penalties for not complying, many smaller websites and forums have been forced to cease operations. In the United States, many states have already passed some type of age verification laws, and several others have proposed such laws. In Canada and Europe, legislators have also been pushing for similar regulations to block content online subject to age verification. There is no doubt The more countries pass similar prohibitive laws, the more other countries will soon follow. Who decides what is sensitive content? When talking about age verification, most assume this only applies to obvious pornographic content. However, many of these laws have much wider reach. For example, the Australian law prohibits access to social media altogether for anyone under the age of 16. This means that once the law comes into full effect, after its transitional period, anyone who uses social media in Australia will have to prove they are older than this age. It is likely that all Australian users will have to provide some form of identifying data to continue using their social media accounts. This is a privacy nightmare. When laws target specific content, definitions of what is appropriate and what isn't often are too broad. This definition is subject to change from one administration to another. Since the introduction of the Online Safety Act in the United Kingdom, there have been reports of Reddit users being unable to access subreddits that don't even contain content that should be covered by the law. Subreddits about current events, LGBTQ+ identity, journalism, and public health have allegedly been asking for verification. There are also wide differences from one country to another. For example, some countries sadly consider simple discussions of gender identity or sexual orientation to be sensitive content. What is deemed inappropriate for children in one culture might not be the same in another. Automating this sort of censorship leads to a lot of misfiring. There has already been several instances of breastfeeding photos being mislabeled for nudity. Important educational material for sex education could get censored and become inaccessible to children who critically need access to it before adulthood. Who will decide which content should be censored and which shouldn't? Will countries hosting the big tech platforms end up having greater decision power in the matter? Will platforms simply decide to apply the strongest level of restriction worldwide? Age verification isn't effective. Even if we could somehow find a global consensus that is perfectly ethical and never misfires on which content children shouldn't access, it will likely fail. Children, and teenagers especially, are and have always been incredibly effective at going around such limitations to feed their curious minds. First, there are technical tools such as VPNs and proxies of all sorts to go around location-based restrictions. Then, there's the classic fake ID and its modern evolution, deepfake face. There will also be, without a doubt, a growing market of pre-verified adult accounts up for sale online. Perhaps age verification measures will work for a couple of months, until products to evade it get the word out. Then they'll become useless, only leaving the ashes of your social media, legal consenting, adult pseudonymity in its path. Why it's bad news for everyone's privacy. Age verification will require all platforms and/or third-party identification service providers to collect an enormous trove of sensitive data on everyone. This goes against all principles of data minimization, generally a vital part of data protection regulations. Daily occurrences of data breach incidents have taught us we cannot trust these services to safeguard our data. Data breaches for this sensitive information are only a matter of time. The concentration of such valuable data will likely be monetized and resold, either by the platforms themselves or by the for-profit third-party age assurance providers they use, or eventually by the criminals who stole it from them. This data trove will include face scans of children with their location trying to pass as adults, and faces and official documents from every adult in the world using social media. If this kind of regulation gets implemented at large, the privacy and safety implications of this are absolutely disastrous. Sadly, age verification legislation will not help safeguard children from harmful content online, but it will effectively remove protection from anyone needing pseudonymity online to stay safe. Moreover, it will put everyone at much greater risk of victimization by identity theft, impersonation, stalking, and worse. Despite the perhaps well-intended legislators, technological solutions aren't always adequate to solve every problem we have. Here again, education and content moderation are likely much better ways to deal with this sort of issue. In the meantime, if you cross a teenager on the street suddenly pointing their phone to scan your adult face, or a young relative looking in your wallet, they probably won't be looking for your money, but most likely for your adult ID. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video about the perils of age verification online, get subscribed so you can stay up to date with our future videos. We wouldn't be able to create educational privacy videos without the support of our donors and members. If you get value from our work, please consider making a donation. See you next time on Privacy Guides.